Hello and welcome. I'm joined by Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament, Lok Sabha. Mr. Tharoor, thank you very much for joining us. So let me ask you, without much ado, sort of for a report card of sorts of the last 10 months from your not-so vantage point.
Well, it's a vantage point inside Parliament, and as a member of the opposition, obviously, you know, one has certain concerns.
Right.
Look,
and let me ask you to split it economically and socially.
Well, on economics, I mean, frankly, as an Indian, I want India to succeed. And if Mr. Modi delivers that, naturally, one can only be happy because we want the country to prosper.
How would you assess him? By looking at his promises and then trying to assess
That's exactly the problem. That's the gap between promise and performance, between rhetoric and results, between words and actual implementation is vast. And then the gap is so great that I really worry about where we're going to get any concrete results.
One or two most stark examples.
I can give you example after example. But we are looking, for example, at the gap between rhetoric. Here is a man who spent his election campaign frequently mouthing the statement that the government has no business to be in business. And yet, this government continues to run airlines and hotels and so on without showing the slightest inclination to say this is an area we need not be in. It says things like, we'll offer red carpet rather than red tape. But the number of regulatory hurdles that need to be overcome before a foreign investment or before starting a new enterprise have not reduced at all in this government. We have great schemes being propounded from the centre.
Could they have reduced? I mean, just on the red tape question.
Yeah, because they don't require parliamentary, the opposition or politics are irrelevant. You just basically get down to rewriting regulations, which are completely within the control of the executive.
Again, can you give me an example there?
Plenty of examples. I mentioned one at the conference today because it struck me as so funny, it stayed in my mind, that every business in India, every factory in India is supposed to maintain something called a lime register. This goes back to the mid-19th century when you needed lime, I think for disinfectant purposes, whitewashing your walls, God not. Obviously, 99% of Indian factories no longer maintain a lime register because that's completely out of date. But because that regulation exists, a corrupt inspector, for example, can come and arm twist a factory owner or manager for a bribe on the grounds that he's not maintaining a lime register. It's a simple example of something which the government could have abolished a long time ago.
So you're saying promises made on red tapeism have not been adhered to?
Well, the number of permits and clearances required. You know, we talk about the ease of doing business that Mr. Modi has said early on in his tenure. He wants India to go from 142nd in the World Bank's ranking of the ease of doing business to at least 50. Well, we haven't moved. In fact, there was a briefly alarming indicator we might slip to 143rd. So the worry about all of this is, when will the speeches be translated into administrative actions? So you have these wonderful schemes being announced and propounded without a budget, without an implementable action plan, without a funding structure or funding scheme, and without an executing authority to go out and implement it. So it remains at the level of sound bites and photo ops. This is my big challenge, my big worry with Mr. Modi. The moment he changes and we have you know, something concrete beyond the photo ops and beyond the headlines on television, then I can be a little more optimistic.
But one got a sense
I haven't got that sense.
One got a sense that you were being a little charitable in the beginning in terms of...
well, I always said he was saying the right things, and I still stress that.
Okay, so you're saying now the time has moved
I actually disagree with very little he has said. My problem is I have nothing to show and nothing to agree on what he's actually done.
And you feel that, again, since we started by saying this is a 10-month report card, you feel that now the time has come to ask questions about delivery?
I started asking questions a couple of months ago because a number of the things that he has failed to do, he could have done much earlier, including, by the way, in his interim budget in July, which was a simple carryover. And, you know, they said, oh, but we only had 3 months since coming to power. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Manmohan Singh had 34 days between becoming finance minister and revolutionizing the Indian economy through liberalization. 34 days is all he had. So
the preconditions were somewhat different.
Even then, the fact is that if you want to, you know, since Mr. Modi's been campaigning for a year and a half, he should have had some concrete plans to execute, and he hasn't got that.
Well, let's talk about the social side. What are the...
That's what worries me also. You see, that's the other thing, is the growing climate of intolerance in our country, which sadly has been given free rein by the mere fact that Mr. Modi and the BJP are in power. Because there is no question that the so-called Sangh Parivar, the Hindutva movement, has for a long time harbored certain regressive views towards minorities, toward the traditions of pluralism and Indian culture and so on. But because they were seen as fringe, ultimately they didn't matter. They represented a small minority of extreme views. Once Mr. Modi, who was very much believed to harbour similar views himself, came to power, these fellows had free rein and they really started running amok. The most outrageous things are said by people who are either close to power or in power. We've had ministers dividing the population into Raamzaade and Haramzaade, or the believers in Ram and bastards. I mean, that's the sort of division of the population that somebody who's a serving minister in Mr. Modi's government is allowed to get away with.
Right.
We've had a prominent member of the ruling party in Parliament speaking in favour of constructing statues of Mr. Godse, the assassin of Mahatma Gandhi, rather than of Mahatma Gandhi, and so on. So all of these things could have been clamped down upon immediately by the government. Instead, Mr. Modi chose for the longest time to retain silence. It's only when churches started getting vandalized and India started attracting deeply negative international press that he finally spoke. And that too only after President Obama had embarrassed us all by reminding our government and Prime Minister of the provisions of our constitution.
Is this having an impact on India's image externally, apart going even after the Obama?
Well, you can't help it, because the problem in today's interconnected world is there is no such thing as a comment that stays in the audience to which it's intended. You can make an inflammatory speech in a village and it becomes breaking news in New Delhi. Similarly, you can make a speech in New Delhi and be heard in Europe, in the Arab world, in Washington, and so on. So the result is that, what may seem to some people to be a trivial incident of a church in an outer suburb of Delhi being vandalized makes it to the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the main newspaper in Germany. And German investors write, in fact, one of them wrote to me saying, is this the kind of India in which you want us to invest? So Mr. Modi has to understand that his liberal objectives, his economic plans, his desire for foreign direct investment in the country also depend on retaining the image of India as a peaceful, pluralistic land, one in which everybody is welcome. We have a proud record civilizationally, but that is being betrayed by the intolerance and bigotry that sadly is rampant under Mr. Modi.
Right. If we were to assume that things may be controlled or clamped down upon or nipped at the bud, so to speak, what would be the other areas that you would now focus on in terms of not just the issues that were promised upon and not delivered, but the unfinished agenda?
Well, the unfinished agenda are things that in many cases were not finished because of the opposition of the very people who are now in power. A very good example is the goods and services tax, the GST, which would be an absolutely indispensable reform for our economy and which by itself may add 1% or even 2% to our GDP. But the fact is that the BJP states, and notably Mr. Modi's own state, were major obstacles in getting this thing adopted, and as a result, the UPA government was unable to do so. Now that Mr. Modi has come to power, the BJP's unspoken mantra is, where you stand depends on where you sit. So when you are sitting in opposition, you oppose everything that the UPA government was doing, whether you agreed with it or not. When you come to power, you realize the wisdom of the UPA, and you start implementing the same policies, and now you sit in power. Anyway, that being the case, GST has been adopted by Mr. Modi, as has 49% foreign direct investment in life insurance, as has a number of things that we had attempted unsuccessfully to push when we were in power. Mr. Modi has a larger majority, so in any case he can get it through. And besides, we are unlikely to oppose things that we ourselves came up with. So on GST, we will cooperate fully with the government, and we hope that's, to my mind, a number one issue to get done.
Right. So if I can sum it up, no, I'm getting a sense that on a few, on a few check boxes on the scorecard, you're actually giving him a tick mark. A positive.
When he gets it done. So far, all we've heard is talk.
Yeah. No, for even taking forward some of UPA's good ideas.
Yeah, sure. No, that there's no question about. But again, it's all interconnected. You can pass a law, for example, that permits investment in your insurance industry, but you have to create an overall economic environment in which a potential investor will want to come in to what he's now permitted to do.
And you've expressed a concern there. So, last question. You visit your constituency in Kerala quite often. What are your constituents telling you? What's the kind of issues that they face today compared to maybe even last year? Things must have improved. Prices are down.
Improved, exactly. Yeah. That's the biggest thing. Obviously, fuel price inflation was a huge negative, which affected all of us, including Mr. Modi's campaign, because he actually was able to make an issue. But he's been very lucky in that international factors have led fuel prices to drop, and that's certainly helped, even though ironically he's not passed on all the benefits to the voter. The cess on petrol has actually gone, the taxes on petrol have gone up. So you're paying 6 rupees more at the pump to the government than you used to when we were in power. But you're still paying less overall because international prices have plummeted.
Yeah.
Food price inflation in many places and for many items has also gone down. But there are some concerns, for example, about government policy when it comes to things that affect the interests of my constituency, which is in the southern tip of India. One is definitely rubber prices, where the government has shown a tremendous indifference to the plight of rubber farmers after the international price has dropped, and therefore the price at which they sell their rubbers dropped from 245 rupees a kilogram to 115 in the last couple of years, whereas their wage bill has gone up because each worker who used to get 150 rupees a day now gets 400 rupees a day. And the cost of your tires hasn't gone down because those prices were pegged in the old days at the 245 rupees a kilo price, but the Modi government, which tends to be in cahoots with the well-off, has not managed to press these chaps to reduce. Well, the tyre companies could lower their prices, or the government could add an import duty to the material the tyre companies are importing to make their tyres so cheap.
But have you specifically asked for this?
Of course we have.
On behalf of your
Kerala has, all the Kerala MPs have asked for this.
Okay.
That's one example, but there are many, many other examples. The Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, the allocations for that, because many of our workers, and in Kerala 92% of them are women, have not been paid. A third example would actually be the rights of our fisher folk, who have been clamoring for subventions and support.
And they've not been paid because the money has not reached the state?
Money has not come from the centre.
Okay. And that's in the last 6 months, or?
Yeah, well, in the last 9 months. Yeah.
Okay.
The fisher folk. Two problems. One is that this government has slashed the amount of subsidized kerosene. Now, I have no problem with that if you will then give a direct benefit by cash transfer to the accounts of fishermen, because they need far more kerosene than the amount that the government is prepared to release to every individual Indian. So as I said, I'm not saying you should preserve every entitlement, but target the benefits. Fishermen need the kerosene, that's what fuels their boats. Second example is the willingness of this government to give permission to foreign trawlers to fish in our economic zones. They're far better equipped, they're mechanized, they've got refrigeration facilities, they're driving Indian boats run by lower class, poor fishermen out of business. So we protested that too. So if you look at my constituency, there are specific issues we worry about. Our people need more railway travel. Roads are few and deeply congested. We're the most densely populated state in the union. But there are no new trains coming. I was able to win a few out of the UPA government. This new government hasn't offered us very much more. So example after example of where people are turning to the government for benefits or policies which this government has been unwilling to give them. And certainly they will all be featured as we talk about these issues when we go back to our voters.
Right. So one absolutely last question. So as you were to look ahead, so what are the one or two issues that really concern you, which you feel the government must address, as in the government in power must address, because we need to move forward together?
Well, I mean, certainly one thing is foreign policy, which is my principal preoccupation as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee as well. And I find that the government is far too driven by domestic preoccupations. For example, my committee cleared the constitutional amendment for the Bangladesh Land Boundary Agreement, which would regularize a long-running sore of 6 decades with what is today Bangladesh. And this government has, to everyone's surprise, not brought it to Parliament for ratification because apparently of the opposition of the Assam BJP. Now, this kind of pettiness is disastrous in foreign policy. Similarly, the unnecessary confusion in Pakistan policy, which alternates between hot and cold, between belligerence one day and conciliation the next, and belligerence the next day again. These things are not in India's interest. We need tranquil and content neighbors we can get along with if we want our country to move forward.
And despite the fact that the Prime Minister is traveling perhaps far more than most people.
He's traveling farther afield. He hasn't gone to the neighborhood very much, except Nepal, and just now, of course, to the Indian Ocean. Well, you know, on foreign policy, we tend not to let our differences cross the water's edge. We tend to be united on foreign policy. But still, on these couple of issues, we have concerns. But by and large, certainly, We have tended not to believe there is such a thing as a Congress foreign policy or a BJP foreign policy. There's only India's foreign policy, and we'd like to see India's national interest always prevail.
It's a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you
Tharoor.
very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.